Good evening and welcome back to Evelina. Slightly shorter update today, but I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. Evelina, as you will recall, has finally consented to stay under Mrs. Beaumont's roof, and therefore she is now staying in the same house as Lord Orville. What on earth could possibly happen next? Probably not what you're thinking. Letter the 6th. Why are Roman numerals so hard? You know what? If I do this again, I'm going to restart the whole video. This is stupid. Letter the 65th. There we go. Evelina in continuation. Clifton, 20th September. Here I am, my dear sir, under the same roof and inmate of the same house as Lord Orville. Indeed, if this were not the case, my situation would be very disagreeable, as you will easily believe when I tell you the light in which I am generally considered. My dear, said Mrs. Selwyn, did you ever before meet with that egregious fop Lovell? I very readily satisfied her as to my acquaintance with him. Oh, then, said she, I am the less surprised at his ill nature, since he has already injured you. I begged her to explain herself, and then she told me that when Lord Orville was speaking to me, Lady Louisa said to Mr. Lovell, Do you know who that is? Why, no, ma'am, pon honour, answered he. I can't absolutely say I do. I only know she's a kind of toad-eater. She made her first appearance in that capacity last spring, when she attended Miss Mervyn, a young lady of Kent. How cruel it is, my dear sir, to be thus exposed to the impertinent suggestions of a man who is determined to do me ill offices. Lady Louisa may well despise a toad-eater, but thank heaven her brother has not heard or does not credit the mortifying appellation. Mrs. Selwyn said she would advise me to pay my court to this Mr. Lovell. For, said she, though he is malicious, he is fashionable, and may do some harm in the great world. But I should disdain myself as much as I do him, were I capable of such duplicity as to flatter a man whom I scorn and despise. We were received by Mrs. Beaumont with great civility, and by Lord Orville with something more. As to Lady Louisa, she scarcely perceived that we were in the room. There has been company here all day, part of which I have spent most happily, for after tea, when the ladies played at cards, Lord Orville, who does not, and I who cannot, play, were consequently at our own disposal, and then his lordship entered into a conversation with me which lasted till supper-time. Almost insensibly I find the constraint, the reserve I have been wont to feel in his presence wear away. The politeness, the sweetness with which he speaks to me restore all my natural cheerfulness, and make me almost as easy as he is himself. And the more so, as I may judge by his looks, I am rather raised than sunk of late in his opinion. I asked him how the bet was at last to be decided. He told me that, to his great satisfaction, the parties had been prevailed upon to lower the sum from 1,000 to £100, and that they had agreed it should be determined by a race between two old women, one of which was to be chosen by each side, and both were to be proved more than 80 years of age, though in every other respect, strong and healthy as possible. When I expressed my surprise at this extraordinary method of spending so much money, I am charmed, said he, at the novelty of meeting with one so unhackneyed in the world, as not to be yet uninfluenced by custom to forget the use of reason. For certain it is that the prevalence of fashion makes the greatest absurdities pass uncensured, and the mind naturally accommodates itself even to the most ridiculous improprieties if they occur frequently. I should have hoped, said I, that the humane proposal made yesterday by your lordship would have had more effect. Oh, cried he, laughing, I was so far from expecting any success that I shall think myself very fortunate if I escape the wit of Mr. Coverley in a lampoon. Yet I spoke openly, because I do not wish to conceal that I am no friend to gambling. After this he took up the New Bath Guide and read it with me till supper-time. In our way downstairs, Lady Louisa said, I thought, brother, you were engaged this evening. Yes, sister, answered he, and I have been engaged. And he bowed to me with an air of gallantry that rather confused me. 23rd September. Almost insensibly have 3 days glided on since I wrote last, and so serenely that but for your absence I could not have formed a wish. My residence here is much happier than I had dared expect. The attention with which Lord Orville honours me is as uniform as it is flattering, and seems to result from a benevolence of heart that proves him as much a stranger to caprice as to pride. For as his particular civilities arose from a generous resentment at seeing me neglected, so will they, I trust, continue as long as I shall in any degree deserve them. I am now not merely easy, but even gay in his presence. Such is the effect of true politeness, that it banishes all restraint and embarrassment. When we walk out, he condescends to be my companion, and keeps by my side all the way we go. When we read, he marks the passages most worthy to be noticed, draws out my sentiments, and favours me with his own. At table, where he always sits next to me, he obliges me by 1,000 nameless attentions, while the distinguishing good breeding with which he treats me prevents my repining at the visibly felt superiority of the rest of the company. 1,000 occasional meetings could not have brought us to that degree of social freedom which 4 days spent under the same roof have insensibly been productive of. And as my only friend in this house, Mrs. Selwyn, is too much engrossed in perpetual conversation to attend much to me, Lord Orville seems to regard me as a helpless stranger, and as such to think me entitled to his good offices and protection. Indeed, my dear sir, I have reason to hope that the depreciating opinion he formerly entertained of me is succeeded by one infinitely more partial. It may be that I flatter myself, but yet his looks, his attentions, his desire of drawing me into conversation, and his solicitude to oblige me, all conspire to make me hope I do not. In short, my dearest sir, these last 4 happy days would repay me for months of sorrow and pain. Oh, Evelina, but have you forgotten the letter? Have you forgotten the letter? It's a very important point that you seem to have forgotten. And yet, it is so true, is it not, that staying in the same place as somebody, of seeing them breakfast, lunch and dinner all day, every day, but surely this is the intensity of such close proximity to somebody, if you've got a crush on them, must naturally bias yourself and make you forget all good common sense in a way that if you just see someone, once a week or once every 2 weeks or however long, it must have a different effect. So I think I can identify with aspects of Evelina. Maybe you can too. Letter the 66th. Evelina in continuation. Clifton, 24th September. This morning I came downstairs very early, and supposing that the family would not assemble for some time, I strolled out, purposing to take a long walk in the manner that I was wont to do at Berry Hill before breakfast. But I had scarce shut the garden gate before I was met by a gentleman, who, immediately bowing to me, I recollected to be the unhappy Mr. McCartney. Very much surprised, I curtsied, and stopped till he came up to me. He was still in mourning, but looked better than when I saw him last, though he had the same air of melancholy with which so much struck me at the first sight of him. Addressing me with the utmost respect, "I am happy, madam," said he, "to have met with you so soon. I came to Bristol but yesterday, and have had no small difficulty in tracing you to Clifton." "Did you know then of my being here?" "I did, madam. The sole motive of my journey was to see you. I have been to Berry Hill, and there I had my intelligence, and at the same time the unwelcome information of your ill health." "Good God, sir! And can you possibly have taken so much trouble?" "Trouble? Oh, madam, could there be any, to return you, the moment I had the power, my personal acknowledgments for your goodness?" I then inquired after Madame Duval and the Snow Hill family. He told me that they were all well, and that Madame Duval proposed soon returning to Paris. When I congratulated him on looking better, "It is yourself, madam," said he. "You should congratulate, for to your humanity alone it may now be owing that I exist at all." He then told me that his affairs were now in a less desperate situation, and that he hoped by the assistance of time and reason to accommodate his mind to a more cheerful submission to his fate. "The interest you so generously took in my affliction," added he, "assures me you will not be displeased to hear of my better fortune. I was therefore eager to acquaint you with it." He then told me that his friend, the moment he had received his letter, quitted Paris and flew to give him his personal assistance and consolation. With a heavy heart he acknowledged he accepted it. "But yet," he added, "I have accepted it, and therefore was bound equally by duty and honour, my first step was to hasten to the benefactress of my distress, and to return, presenting me something in a paper, the only part of my obligations that can be returned. For the rest, I have nothing but my gratitude to offer, and must always be contented to consider myself her debtor. I congratulated him most sincerely upon his dawning prosperity, but begged he would not deprive me of the pleasure of being his friend, and declined receiving the money till his affairs were more settled. While this point was in agitation, I heard Lord Orville's voice, inquiring of the gardener if he had seen me. I immediately opened the garden gate, and his lordship, advancing to me with quickness, said, "Good God, Miss Anville, have you been out alone? Breakfast has been ready some time, and I have been round the garden in search of you." "Your lordship has been very good," said I, "but I hope you have not waited." "Not waited?" repeated he, smiling. "Do you think we could sit down quietly to breakfast with the idea that you would run away from us? But come," offering to hand me, "if we do not return, they will suppose I am run away too. And they very naturally may, as they know the attraction of the magnet that draws me." "I will come, my lord," said I, rather embarrassed. "In 2 minutes." Then turning to Mr. McCartney, with yet more embarrassment, I wished him good morning. He advanced towards the garden with the paper still in his hand. "No, no," cried I, "some other time." "May I then, madam, have the honour of seeing you again?" I did not dare take the liberty of inviting anybody to the house of Mrs. Beaumont, nor yet had I the presence of mind to make an excuse, and therefore, not knowing how to refuse him, I said, "Perhaps you may be this way again tomorrow morning, and I believe I shall walk out before breakfast." He bowed and went away, while I, turning again to Lord Orville, saw his countenance so much altered that I was frightened at what I had so hastily said. He did not again offer me his hand, but walked silent and slow by my side. Good heaven, thought I, what may he not suppose from this adventure? May he not, by my desire of meeting Mr. McCartney tomorrow, imagine it was by design I walked out to meet him today? Tormented by this apprehension, I determined to avail myself of the freedom which his behaviour since I came hither has encouraged, and since he would not ask any questions, began an explanation myself. I therefore slackened my pace to gain time, and then said, "Was not your lordship surprised to see me speaking with a stranger?" "A stranger?" repeated he. "Is it possible that gentleman can be a stranger to you?" "No, my lord," said I, stammering. "Not to me, but only it might look, he might seem—" "No, believe me," said he with a forced smile, "I could never suppose Miss Anville would make an appointment with a stranger." "An appointment, my lord," repeated I, colouring violently. "Pardon me, madam," answered he, "but I thought I heard one." I was so much confounded that I could not speak, yet finding he walked quietly on, I could not endure that he should make his own interpretation of my silence, and therefore, as soon as I had recovered from my surprise, I said, "Indeed, my lord, you are much mistaken. Mr. McCartney has particular business with me, and I knew not how to refuse seeing him. But indeed, my lord, he had not." I stammered so terribly that I could not go on. "I am very sorry," said he gravely, "that I have been so unfortunate as to distress you. But I should not have followed you had I not imagined you had merely walked out for the air." "And so I was," cried I eagerly. "Indeed, my lord, I was. My meeting with Mr. McCartney was quite accidental, and if your lordship thinks there is any impropriety in my seeing him tomorrow, I am ready to give up to that intention." "If I think," said he in a tone of surprise. "Surely Miss Anville must best judge for herself. Surely she cannot leave the arbitration of a point so delicate to one who is ignorant of all the circumstances which attend it." "If," said I, "it was worth your lordship's time to hear them, you should not be ignorant of the circumstances which attend it." "The sweetness of Miss Anville's disposition," said he in a softened voice, "I have long admired, and the offer of a communication which does me so much honour is too grateful to me not to be eagerly caught at." Just then Mrs. Selwyn opened the parlour window, and our conversation ended. I was rallied upon my passion for solitary walking, but no questions were asked me. When breakfast was over, I hoped to have had some opportunity of speaking with Lord Orville, but Lord Merton and Mr. Coverley came in, and insisted upon his opinion of the spot they had fixed upon for the old women's race. The ladies declared they would be of the party, and accordingly we all went. The race is to be run in Mrs. Beaumont's garden. The two gentlemen are as anxious as if their joint lives depended upon it. They have at length fixed upon objects, but have found great difficulty in persuading them to practise running, in order to try their strength. This grand affair is to be decided next Thursday. When we returned to the house, the entrance of more company still prevented my having any conversation with Lord Orville. I was very much chagrined, as I knew he was engaged at the Hotwells in the afternoon. Seeing therefore no probability of speaking to him before the time of my meeting Mr. McCartney arrived, I determined that rather than risk his ill opinion, I would leave Mr. McCartney to his own suggestions. Yet, when I reflected upon his peculiar situation, his poverty, his sadness, and more than all the rest, the idea I knew he entertained of what he calls his obligations to me, I could not resolve upon a breach of promise which might be attributed to causes of all others the most offensive, to one whose misfortunes has made extremely suspicious of slights and contempt. After the most uneasy consideration, I at length determined upon writing an excuse, which would at once save me from either meeting or affronting him. I therefore begged Mrs. Selwyn's leave to send her man to the Hotwells, which she instantly granted, and then I wrote the following note. To Mr. McCartney. Sir, as it will not be in my power to walk out tomorrow morning, I would by no means give you the trouble of coming to Clifton. I hope, however, to have the pleasure of seeing you before you quit Bristol. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Evelina Anville. I desired the servant to inquire at the pump room where Mr. McCartney lived, and returned to the parlour. As soon as the company dispersed, the ladies retired to dress. I then unexpectedly found myself alone with Lord Orville, who, the moment I rose to follow Mrs. Selwyn, advanced to me and said, Will Miss Anville pardon my impatience, if I remind her of the promise she was so good as to make me this morning? I stopped and would have returned to my seat, but before I had time the servants came to lay the cloth. He retreated and went towards the window, and while I was considering in what manner to begin, I could not help asking myself what right I had to communicate the affairs of Mr. McCartney, and I doubted whether, to clear myself from one act of imprudence, I had not committed another. Distressed by this reflection, I thought it best to quit the room, and give myself some time for consideration before I spoke. And therefore, only saying that I must hasten to dress, I ran upstairs. Rather abruptly, I own, and so I fear Lord Orville must think. Yet what could I do? Unused to the situations in which I find myself, and embarrassed by the slightest difficulties, I seldom, till too late, discover how I ought to act. Just as we were all assembled to dinner, Mrs. Selwyn's man, coming into the parlour, presented to me a letter and said, I can't find our Mr. McCartney, madam, but the post office people will let you know if they hear of him. I was extremely ashamed of this public message, and meeting the eyes of Lord Orville, which were earnestly fixed on me, my confusion redoubled, and I knew not which way to look. All dinner time he was as silent as myself, and the moment it was in my power I left the table and went to my own room. Mrs. Selwyn presently followed me, and her questions obliged me to own almost all the particulars of my acquaintance with Mr. McCartney, in order to excuse my writing to him. She said it was a most romantic affair, and spoke her sentiments with great severity, declaring that she had no doubt but that he was an adventurer and an impostor. And now, my dear sir, I am totally at a loss what I ought to do. The more I reflect, the more sensible I am of the utter impropriety, nay, treachery of revealing the story, and publishing the misfortunes and poverty of Mr. McCartney, who has an undoubted right to my secrecy and discretion, and whose letter charges me to regard his communication as sacred. And yet the appearance of mystery, perhaps something worse, which this affair must have to Lord Orville, his seriousness, and the promise I have made him are inducements scarce to be resisted for trusting him, with the openness he has reason to expect from me. I am equally distressed too, whether or not I shall see Mr. McCartney tomorrow morning. Oh, sir, could I now be enlightened by your counsel, from what anxiety and perplexity should I be relieved? But no, I ought not to betray Mr. McCartney, and I will not forfeit a confidence which would never have been reposed in me, but from a reliance upon my honour, which I should blush to find myself unworthy of. Desirous as I am of the good opinion of Lord Orville, I will endeavour to act as if I was guided by your advice, and making it my sole aim to deserve it, leave to time and to fate my success or disappointment. Since I have formed this resolution, my mind is more at ease, but I will not finish my letter till the affair is decided. I am going to finish this reading, however, at this point, and leave you all in delicate suspense. Well, Mr. McCartney's return certainly adds a touch of the dramatic to it. As I was reading, I felt myself thinking that this is exactly what would happen in a Korean drama. You know, somebody from the past, the person you've saved from destruction, suddenly turning up in a city on the other side of the country, quite without reason. We don't know who this person is, but the mystery only grows deeper, and at the very moment when she would least want to be seen by the man she's in love with, he comes out and forms immediate suspicions of jealousy. It is exactly like a Korean drama. Incidentally, if you want to talk about Korean dramas, I'm watching quite a lot, and they really have a great deal in common with 18th century novels. So there's my future PhD topic in a nutshell. Anyway, I shall leave you tonight. I hope you all have a very lovely evening. Good night.